Welcome to the Shock Your Potential podcast with your host, Michael Sherlock. We all have potential, but sometimes we need inspiration to get us to our peak performance. Whether you are starting out in your career, ready to move up the corporate ladder, or taking the leap into entrepreneurship, Michael's guests provide powerful tools and resources to shock your potential. Shock Your Potential is a global professional development training company committed to your unique journey. Learn more about us today at shockyourpotential.com. Listen in to today's expert.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Shock Your Potential. I am your host, Michael Sherlock, and all month long for May, Mindful May, as I like to call it, we are talking about ways to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, you name it, it doesn't matter. And my guest today has a story to tell that is not only personal to her, but it really created a path for her that maybe she might not have seen for herself before, but I know that it's not only made a difference to her life, but the people that she works with today. So my guest is Triptta Butkovich, and she was once a successful organizational development consultant. She was an awesome executive coach. She was also described often as life of the party, mother to two gorgeous boys. You know, she seemed to have it all on the outside, but she was also, which many didn't know, the victim of narcissistic abuse. And I think as you guys hear her story, many of us will find areas of this that really relate to us, whether it's in personal lives or professional lives. So I really encourage you to think with not only an open mind, but of your own situations. But here's the upside. After 16 years of secretly living for someone else, and that's really important because we're talking about how we control what we can control within ourselves, she realized that only she could change her situation. And she began to seek out different kinds of support to help her make sense of the chaos and the hurt in her life. And yep, she dedicated hundreds and hundreds of hours of healing modalities, attended mass coaching in auditoriums, studying the human psyche via short accreditations and a PhD enrollment. Her coaching background, her openness and readiness to take action paid off for her. It might have taken her 8 years, but in the end, she found her identity and she understood her value, embraced it, and the vulnerabilities that went along with it in order to take her power back. She now has an amazing life. She has a 7-year-old daughter, her third child, and lives a happily married life surrounded by the colors of nature in Dwight, Ontario. And it is for Ella Grace, her daughter, and herself, and countless people like her that she gave up her corporate life and became an abuse recovery coach. And by the way, she's on a mission, and I love this mission to provide a safe and open environment for 1 million victims of narcissistic and emotional abuse and help them to learn to value themselves for exactly who they are and finally begin to enjoy healthy relationships. And she also says, it might have taken her 8 years to do it, but you don't have to wait that long. So Triptta, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Michael. Long overdue.
Yeah, you know, yes, it is. I know we tried to get this taped for quite a while. I'm so glad that we were able to, because your story and your mission, I think, are really important and a really great end point, because you are actually rounding out our entire month of May. And I think it's a great point to remind ourselves how much we need to take care of ourselves and not look the other way in our own minds when we have things that are really causing us deep and divisive pain within our own hearts. So I gave a little bit of your overview, which tells quite a bit of your story, but I know you can only tell it the best from your perspective. So tell us a little bit more about you, your business today, and how you help your clients to shock their potential.
So, I thought that initially I was helping my clients shock their potential when I was an executive coach, but I was definitely underplaying it at the time because I wasn't able to shock my own potential. In fact, I was running away from it. And I think, people underestimate when there's a little voice that talks to us constantly and we keep putting it down. And I did that for 16 years with my ex-husband, right? 16 years of abuse. It was physical abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse. You just name it, and it was there in my life. And there is no human being who can actually turn around and say that when you're constantly facing abuse in your personal life, that you are working 100% in your job.
Yeah.
That myth of my work and my personal life are two separate dimensions or two separate areas is exactly that. It's a myth, because you are the common person in that story. We do not have the ability, much as we'd like to tell ourselves that we have the ability to put on this facade in front of us when we are facing a certain type of audience and remove it when we're not. That doesn't happen. So my abuse at home made me work really hard in my job. I ran a development company, as you said. It was my own organization, which I ran, I think, to everybody's charging. They thought that it was an extremely successful organization, which it was. But was I truly happy and successful? Because there are two separate words there. Mm-hmm. A lot of people equate their happiness with success. Here's myth number 2. Success is not equal happiness. I am a living example of that. I was extremely successful in my business, but I was extremely unhappy in my life. Unhappy in my life with the abuse that I faced at home. Because of that abuse, I ran away to my work. I missed out on my children, my boys growing up. I did not face my own situation. And as a result, today, if I look back, while most people can say I've got friends and I've got, really deep relationships and things like that, when I look back in my life in 2008, when I finally said, okay, enough is enough, I didn't really have the confidence of deep relationships and connections around me. Yeah. I had a lot of acquaintances that I'd made. I had a lot of fans of me and my work, but I had no friends. Mm-hmm. I had no connection in terms of a support system. And the few people that I thought who were friends, and they were, it's not to say that they were not, but one small example of the result of my abuse and the facade that I put on, that there was no abuse in my life and that my life was actually absolutely perfect, was I had my girlfriend when I was getting divorced and all I needed a hug. We all have those weak moments. And I just wanted to cry on someone's shoulder comfortably without another worry. I had enough. Yeah. And she turned around and told me at the time, come on, Triptta, you can't cry. You've got balls of steel.
Oh, boy.
And I was like, I don't have balls.
Yeah.
I just want to cry. Yeah. I just want to have a weak moment. I want to have, because that's what my life is full of, actually. So hiding from myself, hiding my issues and my commotion in my life from my friends, from my family, left me nothing but isolated, completely isolated. And we're not meant to be isolated as human beings in the first place. We all, our most basic need today, and if you look at Maslow's hierarchy and all of that, it's not even food, water, shelter anymore. It is that sense of belonging. That sense of belonging is the first thing that's eroded when you're facing abuse. That sense of belonging is the first thing that is responsible for your depression. That sense of belonging or lack of sense of belonging is the first thing that is responsible for a lot of anxieties that you face. And I've seen this in teams and corporates as well. It's, when somebody doesn't feel like they belong to that particular team, or they don't feel like they belong to that particular tribe because of how a leader might be leading that team, that leads to the stress levels for that individual is unbeatable. It really is. And people need to give that more thought.
I agree. As you were talking, I was also thinking, as I was writing down notes about, when you are trying so hard, like you said, from the abuse, you ran from the abuse by diving and giving everything you had to the professional side, because that allowed you to keep some sense of self-identity. It might not have given you a sense of
Absolutely.
belonging, but it
Yeah.
gave you self-identity that you could hold on to. But in order to keep that facade up and keep strong in that, I think, because it makes me think about when at various points when it was having severe depression, to keep the facade up took so much energy. I had no time to give to personal relationships because I would have to work that much harder to keep the facade up in front of friends. So, I pushed people away, not really because I wanted to, but because it was so exhausting doing that I couldn't do that. And if I let my self show through, then I might not be able to keep the facade up the next day when I had to get back to work. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you experience that, but the whole thing becomes exhausting, and you get into and this wasn't, from abuse. This was just from me and fighting, my own hormonal imbalance. But, that in and of itself is so exhausting. And then people think you do have balls of steel because they're like, well, you look happy all the time, or you look pulled together all the time. Why do you need to cry? Shut up. I'm trying to be like you.
And that's the first thing that I will say. Don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah.
Don't look at a person and think that they have it all, because I think
Yeah.
there isn't an individual on this planet who has it all,
Yeah.
right? But at the same time, for me, it wasn't just the abuse, and it wasn't just the energy to keep that facade up, but also there was another reason why I kept that facade up. And that reason was the fear of judgment and a sense of shame
Mm-hmm.
that I felt went along with it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy to think that I should feel ashamed about something that my ex-husband was doing to me. But it's when an individual is faced with that kind of abuse, and that abuse can come from a friend, that abuse can come from a partner, that abuse can come from a parent, that abuse can come from a co-worker, that abuse can come from a boss. It can
Yes.
come to you from kids, right?
Yes.
And it shakes your foundations, and it creates so much self-doubt that shame for some people, like it was for me, is actually a very normal sense to feel within you. And we
Mm-hmm.
go to great lengths to cover up that shame and shy away from negative judgments of
Mm-hmm.
people,
Yeah,
right? Because
absolutely.
we've kind of set or created this picture in our minds that this is what happiness looks like, or this is what you need to look like or be like to come across as successful, so people will want to connect with you.
Yeah.
That is such a burden to carry.
Yeah.
Over and above the abuse, that's a burden to carry that I can tell you now, having been through it, that that's not a burden that one should carry.
Right. And
It
and it's hard
costs
to
you.
break it.
It's very hard to break it because, as I said, it's the association with shame, the association with judgments of other people, wanting to please, wanting to belong, wanting to feel needed as opposed to being abused, wanting some validation, which a person in any situation of abuse is seeking for validation, and they don't have that comfort within themselves because that's just the nature of emotional and narcissistic abuse.
Yeah.
That's the abuser's ammo. That's what they go to, is they tear you down piece by piece.
Yes,
But it's
absolutely.
important for you to believe that it's not you.
I love how you said this, because I say this all the time. You never know what else is going on in anybody else's lives. I always say you never know what goes on behind anybody else's four walls. Even when you live in row house in Philadelphia, where you've got neighbors on both sides of your walls, you very rarely hear everything that's going on, but you just never know what's going on with someone. So even if somebody has a horrible day, they, honk at you on the street, they're a jerk in the grocery store, you don't know what they dealt with that day. And some people are just jerks, but other people you don't know. And the same thing as if they look perfect on the outside, you can't assume that that means everything's perfect on the inside. So what made you then, after you did all this work for yourself and you did the hard work and you struggled with it, what made you then decide to, what became this mission? Why did you want to then help others try and get out of it? And if somebody's listening right now and saying, I know this story, there's that, I'm living this story, or I think my best friend's living this story, or, something, how do you help your clients to begin that rebuilding process and find a healthier way to think about themselves and interact with the world?
So, it does take small steps, because the amount of doubt that abusive relationships create in the minds and the body, not just the minds, but the body of the individual as well, that it really takes small incremental steps to get the person out of that situation. I wish I had somebody guide me through it. And I wish I had somebody who would say that, Tripta, this is what you need to do. And this is how you can rebuild it slowly and surely. Unfortunately, I was in Dubai at the time, the glitzy, glamorous part of the world where everybody is so happy, making so much money. Not, but that's what everybody sees. And there was no way for me to reach out to any individual, or I didn't even think that something was possible, or this kind of coaching was actually possible over there. So small incremental steps is what I learned first. I started with small things like allowing my hair to be mine. I know I don't look it right now, but this is for my daughter. I actually have really curly hair. And the first thing I actually did was allow my hair to be curly and say, this is me, right? I started changing the way I dressed and started dressing for myself, not for my husband, or not what other people thought was professional, or, so these were the small steps that I started taking. And when I started taking these small steps, that's when my own confidence within my own self, not externalized, but internalized, where I started feeling better myself. But all my other, shall I say, learnings, so the short accreditations that you talked about, my PhD enrollment, my theta healing, Reiki. As I said, I went down every route that you could possibly conceive of. They all led to the same outcome. They all say the same thing, and that is, you need to have a sense of self. Very, very critical for you to have a sense of self. Super important for you to be able to build that sense of self is to find your identity again. Now, what our identity might have been versus what your identity is today of you is something that you need to discover, firstly, but also know that you can create your own identity. It's up to us.
Right.
Our genes do not carry our identity. Our genes might carry everything else. It does not carry our identity. We make that ourselves. The other thing that I actually learned through this process is that we experience cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when we feel the stress in our minds, when we're doing something and you're experiencing that stress of whether it is something that you don't like doing and you're doing it for whatever your reasons. That cognitive dissonance normally comes when you're working against your values. So if you haven't spent time articulating your values to yourself, when I say articulating, don't just think, oh, I'm an honest person and honesty is my value, because honesty means different things to different people. Right? If you don't want your values to be, like corporate values, which are mostly pictures on walls, then you need to extrapolate your values, understand your values, and actually use those values for all your decision making, especially the difficult ones. Is that difficult decision in line with my values or not? So it's, for me, living against my values was my biggest dissonance factor and my biggest stressor, more than my abuse, actually. I wanted to bring up my boys, but when I was doing my paperwork for Canada, for example, I found that I had to submit details of where I'd been in a year for 10 years. There were years, not one, years, where I noted down painfully that I spent in excess of 200 years away from home. Sorry, 200 days away from home.
I figured where you were, but it felt like 200 years.
My boys were really young.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. More than 200 days away from home.
Yeah.
Well, who was bringing up my boys? And family is a strong value of mine.
Mm-hmm.
Where was my accountability, which is my other value? Where was my accountability to myself, which was my other value? Mm-hmm. And all these factors, I only realized them later on as I was going through my developmental process. So to shorten that 8 years, find out your identity. Start looking out for yourself. Okay. And your identity, your external is as important as your internal. You know, people say, oh, don't go by the looks. No, it's important for you to go by your own looks and feel comfortable and recognize yourself when you look at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, I agree.
It is important for you to feel comfortable with your decisions, that they're in line with your values.
Yeah.
I also found in the process that we gather so many limiting beliefs through our experience of life and particularly through the experience of abuse, because we get told so often, oh, you can't do that, or you're incapable, or anything and everything that puts you down helps you create more limiting beliefs in your life. And it is those limiting beliefs that actually prevent you from taking steps going further. So it's important for you to start listening to yourself as you speak, to say, when you say, oh, that's impossible. Really? Is anything impossible? And I'm not just saying that lightly. Very often we say, oh, that's impossible, or it's not for me, or I'll do that later. The one piece of work that actually helped me overcome this was Brené Brown. And when Brené Brown put up to start questioning yourself, to address your own vulnerabilities, and to see as to how your own vulnerabilities are actually getting in your way, that piece really helped me identify my own limiting beliefs and identify where my vulnerabilities and my limiting beliefs were actually interacting, to stop putting them aside. And the way I would do that was between my values and between my boundaries that I then established for myself. So it was a process, quite checkered for me. So I had to keep coming back to different pieces of this puzzle. But eventually, I would say I found that I needed to do my legacy piece first. I needed to decide on who I wanted to be and who I am, and a combination of those, because as I said, you can create your identity. Looking at my identity, looking at my values, looking at my limiting beliefs, and looking at my boundaries. And I said, this is all me now. And this is how I'm going to operate. Looking at my boundaries, there are some tough situations. It means you have to say no to people who want to push your boundaries.
Yes.
And you have to learn to be comfortable saying no. And
I agree.
Unfortunately, sometimes we just don't do that. Because we want to be liked, or we don't want to be judged, or whatever reasons we give to ourselves to say, oh, let me just say yes this once.
Or because I've always said yes before. So, I'll say no to the next person, but this person, they've always expected me to do that. And that's actually where you really need to start, is with the people that continue to ask and ask when they know somewhere down deep they shouldn't, but they know that you'll do it. So, those people, God love them. And some of them are people you love very much, they know when they're taking advantage of you.
Absolutely. And they know, it's like a child, right? My 7-year-old daughter does this. Oh, come on. And she'll put on that puppy face, and I'll tell her, I say, I know your face is cute, but nope means no. Not changing my mind. Been there, done that. Not doing it again,
Yeah, I know. I'll have to tell you a cute story about my son when he was 7. He didn't get what he wanted either. Well, and I love it, Tripta. I really appreciate.
So it is about comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry,
I really appreciate your vulnerability with your story too, because I think that it's really important that people know that even if you don't feel like you can take your power back, or feel like, well, I don't really know how to create my identity or find my identity again, that they really can. It just takes the baby steps, but it takes making those steps. And that's the hardest part, is the first step, always feels the toughest. It usually is, to get the momentum. Yeah. But pretty soon, when you're 10 steps farther down, you look back and go, well, I can't even believe I know that person who was 10 steps ago. Wow. I wonder what the next couple steps will bring me.
And absolutely. In fact, for the last 3 months that I was away in India, and to maintain my own sanity with what was going on with my parents, I always practiced yoga. As I said, I've been a Reiki healer for a very long time, but I actually went and did my yoga teacher training certificate as well. And one of the things, the reason why I bring that into this conversation is, one of the things that I picked up in that process was something known as the chakra system. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It is known in the Western world as well, but I would encourage you to Google it if you don't. So there are 7 chakras that we have in our system, and these are just energy fields. What is really important to understand in an abusive situation is trying to maintain a balance of your chakras really helps you take those initial steps. And your absolute first chakra, and the simplest step that you can actually take with it, is what's known as your root chakra. That's at the base of your spine. So if you were to sit in lotus position with your back straight, but on the ground, and if you could be connected to earth, that's the most grounding experience that you can get. And just for 10 minutes, if you can't go take a walk in nature, sit grounded on the ground for 10 minutes, breathing in consciously, breathing out consciously. As you breathe in, you're empowering your breath to go right down to the very extremities of your body, and you're visualizing a red breath going down. I have worked this with, I would say about exactly 9, not about, but exactly 9 people so far who I'm helping come out of abusive relationships and situations. And they found just this practice of 10 minutes of sitting on the ground, breathing in the energy and making it go to the entire body, and breathing out exhaustion, breathing out weakness in their mind, has really helped them move along in their confidence to be able to start their journey. So for those who don't know where to start and how to start, or discovering your identity is too big a leap for you right now, I would say slow down, cross your legs, close your eyes, sit on the ground, back straight, breathe consciously for just 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And no more than that. And I promise you, you will see change.
Well, and it's like you said earlier, you made the point about it's not just a changing of your mind or a resetting of your mind, it's a resetting of your body. Because when you've been in an abusive situation, you physically react to things. A noise can make you physically relax, a loud voice, the presence of somebody that you feel, it may not be the abuser, it might just be somebody else, but you get that same vibe from that person. Our bodies react to protect us, and to teach them not to be in fight or flight mode all the time requires a rewiring of our bodies as well as our minds. And I've been meditating now for more than 10 years, and to me that was the greatest number one change in my life, was just realizing that as I feel things make me stressed, 3 deep breaths can get me out of them. It's amazing how 3 deep breaths can take me from, I don't know what I'm going to do, to, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I still don't know what I'm going to do, but it's less stressful for me right now.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you on that. And and physiologically for me to share with you. So when we get stressed, we actually shallow breathe. So we're actually from the top of our lungs, and that means we're not really taking any air in.
Right.
And oxygen is what fuels our body. Oxygen is what fuels our mind. So if you're not breathing enough, how are you fueling your mind or your body? You're not.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Right.
Goodness. I think we could talk about this all day long, because there's just so much great information, but I love the fact that you do this and this is your mission. So 1 million, I know you're going to hit it. Tripta, we are going to have all your contact information on our show notes, but just in case somebody wants to look you up right now because they feel like maybe this is the one that will really help me make the transition, what's the best way for them to reach you?
You can find me on my website, which is Design You, which is DESIGN, N for November, and U is YOU, all one word, .ca. The website has all my details, but it also has a community link, which will take you to the Facebook page. It's a free community where tips are posted on a daily basis for whoever wants to take it on, however they want to take it on in their own time and pace. There are tips, there are quizzes, there are modules that you can actually take on for yourself to see if you want to work with yourself and trust yourself to do that. Go right ahead and do it. There are resources there. And at any time anybody wants to reach out to me, there's a simple schedule an appointment button right there.
There, easy, wonderful. Well, before we go, do you have any last words of wisdom or pearls of advice for my listeners and viewers?
Breathe. You are the most important person in your life. Nobody else is. And you're whole and complete from the day you were born till the day you pass on. You are the only one who can actually fulfill yourself. Nobody else can fulfill you in any way, shape, or form.
I love it. Tripta, thank you so much for not only sharing your story, but sharing your inspiration and giving our viewers and listeners something incredible to think about for them and people that they love. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today.
Michael, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Shock Your Potential podcast. Learn more about us today at shockyourpotential.com, including details on Michael's 2 best-selling books. Tell me more, how to ask the right questions and get the most out of your employees, and sales mixology, why the most potent sales and customer experiences follow a recipe for success. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and like us today.